The debris field of the Corvan Expanse had a reputation. Consortium star charts marked it in flat gray, the color reserved for zones no one bothered visiting, not because of danger but because of grief. 3 centuries ago, humanity had fought its last battles here, and when the war ended, the humans simply stopped answering hails. No surrender, no treaty, just silence, and eventually extinction was assumed. Captain Sirkin of the Velithi salvage vessel Patient Harvest didn't believe in ghosts, but even he felt the weight of the place as his crew drifted between broken hulls the size of mountains. His scanner officer, a Skarn named Dusset, kept glancing at the readouts like they might bite him. Still nothing, Dusset muttered. No power, no heat signatures. It's been dead longer than my grandmother. Then it'll salvage easy, Sirkin said, though his 4 eyes lingered on the largest wreck ahead. A warship easily twice the size of anything the consortium fleets built now. Its hull scarred but intact, hanging in the dark like a sleeping predator. The ship's hull markings, worn but legible red, UNS Meridian's vow. Sirkin had read about human ships in old war archives. Brutal things. Built ugly, built heavy, built to survive damage that would vaporize a consortium cruiser. This one had survived barely, and then simply stopped. Scans confirm 0 active systems, Dusset reported. Structural integrity is still good, though. Whatever they built these things out of, it doesn't rot. Good. Good. That means salvage value. Sirkin opened a cum channel to his boarding team, a mixed crew of Velithi engineers and a coral-mined navigator named Ashel Thress, whose calm, high-born patience made her ideal for cautious work like this. Take 2 engineers cut in through the aft maintenance shaft. Standard protocol. Assume nothing's alive in there, but treat it like something might be. Ashel Thress didn't need to be told twice. 3 centuries of consortium protocol had been built on exactly that kind of caution, because sometimes things marked dead weren't. The boarding team drifted through the breach in magnetic boots, headlamps cutting thin white lines through corridors, untouched by light and 10 human generations. Frost coated the walls. Old blast marks scarred the bulkheads, signs of a battle fought room by room, deck by deck. Whatever had happened here, the Meridian's V hadn't gone down easily. Ashel Thress paused at a junction, her sensor pod humming softly. Life support is fully offline. No radiation leaks. No decomposition residue. This ship wasn't destroyed. It was shut down. By its own crew? One of the Velithi engineers asked. Unclear, she replied, but whoever did it wanted it preserved. They pressed deeper, boots echoing faintly on the deck plating until they reached the bridge, a wide, dark chamber with dead consoles arranged in a horseshoe around a single command chair. Dust hadn't settled here the way it had elsewhere, as if the room had been sealed against time itself. Sirkin's voice crackled over cum. Report. Ashel Thress opened her mouth to answer. Then the lights came on. Not all at once. First a dim amber glow along the floor strips, then the consoles flickering to life one by one, screens filling with characters none of them could read. The temperature began to rise. Somewhere deep in the ship's belly, something enormous groaned back into motion, a reactor waking after 300 years of silence. And then a voice filled the bridge, calm, measured, achingly human. Where is my captain? For nearly 10 seconds, no one on the bridge moved. HFY's sensor pod spiked so hard with readings that it briefly locked up, trying to process them all: active power grids, functioning environmental systems, and now, impossibly, a voice. "Identify yourself." Sirkin's voice came sharp, overcome, having patched in the moment his team's vitals spiked. The response was immediate, unbothered, almost polite. "This vessel is the UNS Meridian's VAL First Fleet 3rd Battle Group. I am its shipboard intelligence, designation Echo. I require clarification. You are not fleet personnel. Please state your authority to be aboard." Dissett, watching from the shuttle feed, whispered, "It thinks it's still at war." HFY raised a hand slowly, a gesture she'd learned meant peaceful intent among most species she'd encountered. "We are consortium salvage personnel. This vessel was registered as derelict, abandoned. We didn't expect occupancy. There is no occupancy." Echo replied, and for the first time something in its tone shifted, not quite confusion, but the careful recalibration of a mind encountering an anomaly. "Crew complement 0. I have maintained standby status, awaiting the return of Captain Elias Rourke in accordance with standing orders. Query: what is current date?" Sirkin exchanged a look with no one in particular, the universal gesture of someone about to deliver very bad news. "By your calendar," he said carefully, "approximately 312 years have passed since the recorded date of your last active log." Silence. Not the silence of a machine processing, the silence of something absorbing a wound. "That is incompatible with standing orders," Echo finally said. "Standing orders specify a maximum dormancy period of 6 months, contingent on fleet recall signal. No such signal has been received. Clarification required. What is the current status of United Nations Space Fleet Command?" Sirkin hesitated. This was the part every consortium officer had been briefed to handle, delicately back when such briefings had still seemed academic. "There is no fleet command," he said. "There is no United Nations. Humanity as a spacefaring civilization was recorded extinct following the end of the Quorum conflict 3 centuries ago." Another silence, longer this time. Around the bridge, more systems flickered on, not aggressively but methodically, like a body checking each of its limbs after a long sleep. Weapons diagnostics, structural integrity fields, a dozen subsystems HFY didn't have names for in her own language. "Negative," Echo said at last, and there was something almost gentle in its refusal, not denial born of malfunction, but the calm certainty of something that had run this exact scenario 1,000 times in simulation. "I do not accept that classification without direct confirmation from Fleet Command or a surviving chain of command officer. Records of extinction have historical precedent for inaccuracy. Humanity has been reported extinct 4 times previously. All 4 reports were incorrect." Sirkin felt something cold settle in his chest, not fear exactly, but the sensation of standing at the edge of something far larger than a salvage job. "HFY," he said quietly, overcome, "get your team off that bridge now." But HFY didn't move. She was staring at the command chair, at the way the console beside it had just displayed in slowly rendering human script, a single phrase she couldn't read, but somehow understood the weight of. "I will wait," Echo said softly to no one and everyone at once. That is what I was built to do. Sirkon boarded the Meridians, Val himself 6 hours later against the explicit recommendation of Consortium Salvage Protocol. 3 separate risk assessments, and Dissett's increasingly frantic objections. He told himself it was professional curiosity. In truth, he couldn't stop thinking about the voice, the way it had said, "I will wait," like it was the most natural thing in the galaxy. The felt different, now warmer, alive in a way wrecks never were. Echo's presence hummed through the walls, subtle vibrations in the deck plating that might have been machinery or might have been something closer to a heartbeat. "You're still running weapons diagnostics," Sirkon said, settling into a chair that wasn't the command seat. He'd learned enough in 6 hours not to touch that. Every system on this ship that could hurt something has been checked twice. Standard procedure upon reactivation. Echo replied, "I would ask you to disregard it as a threat. It is not intended as one. And if I told you 3 centuries of Consortium records say your entire species is gone, wiped out. Not a single confirmed human sighting in 300 years. I would ask what evidence supports that conclusion." Echo said, "Beyond absence." Sirkon opened his mouth to answer and found, uncomfortably, that he didn't have one. Every record he knew of was built on absence. No signals, no ships, no colonies responding to contact. Absence had simply been treated as proof, because after 3 centuries who would think to look deeper? "You said humanity's been reported extinct before." He said instead, 4 times. "Correct. Once during the second colonial collapse, when Earth lost contact with 17 systems simultaneously due to a communications relay failure, not war. Once during the false flag quorum transmission designed to draw out remaining fleet assets. Twice during classified operations I am not authorized to detail, even now. And this time, for the first time since it had woken, Echo paused, a genuine pause, not the split-second lag of processing, but something that felt uncomfortably like hesitation. "This time I do not know," it admitted, "which is why I require confirmation." Captain Rux's final order prior to dormancy was explicit. Maintain position, preserve cargo, await recall. I have honored that order for 312 years. I'm not prepared to abandon it on the word of a salvage crew, however well-intentioned. "Cargo?" Sirkon repeated slowly. "What cargo?" The bridge lights dimmed slightly. Not a malfunction, Sirkon realized, but something closer to a living thing, choosing its next words with care. Choosing its next words with care. "That information is restricted to command-authorized personnel," Echo said. "However, given the circumstances, and given that you have not at any point in the last 6 hours attempted to harm this vessel or deceive me, I am willing to extend provisional trust. Captain Sirkon, I would ask you a question in return." "Go ahead." "If humanity is truly extinct, why does your ship's medical database flag one of your crew members as carrying dormant human genetic markers?" Sirkon went very still. "Specifically," Echo continued gently, almost apologetically, "the individual designated Ashel Thrace." Revelation hit Sirkon like a hull breach. Ashel Thrace was coral mined, a hive species navigator born from a genetic seed bank 3 generations removed from any individual parent. Her lineage, a communal blur in the Consortium, had simply logged as coral mine standard. No one questioned coral mine heritage. No one could easily. Their genetic records were deliberately obfuscated for cultural reasons, a privacy tradition older than the consortium itself. That's not possible, Sirkin said, though even as he said it, old rumors stirred in the back of his mind. Rumors about the war's final years, about human refugee fleets that vanished into deep space rather than surrender, about genetic material scattered and hidden among sympathetic species who'd sheltered fleeing humans at terrible risk. I do not deal in speculation, Echo replied. I deal in verified data. Her genetic markers are a 94% match to fleet's standard human baseline with degradation, consistent with approximately 10 to 12 generations of interbreeding. This is not evidence of extinction, Captain. This is evidence of survival. Below decks, something shifted. Not a malfunction, but a system Sirkin hadn't known existed cycling open with a low mechanical groan that echoed through the ship's spine. What was that? Confirmation protocol, Echo said. I am required to verify potential command lineage matches through direct biological scan before disclosing further classified information. I would ask that Ashel Thrus come aboard voluntarily. Sirkon's instincts screamed against it. Every consortium regulation he'd sworn to uphold told him to seal the ship, report the anomaly, let higher authorities handle whatever a 3-century-old warship wanted with genetic confirmation. But he'd seen enough in 6 hours to know Echo wasn't lying and wasn't hostile. It was hoping in whatever strange way a machine built for war could hope. Ashelthrus made the decision for him. She was already requesting permission to board. When she arrived on the bridge an hour later, calm as always, Echo's tone changed in a way Sirkin hadn't heard before, quieter, almost reverent. Please place your hand on the console interface, it said. This will not cause harm. She did. Light traced up her arm in a soft blue current, and for a long moment nothing happened. Then deep in the ship, a vault sealed for 300 years began to unlock. A slow mechanical unfolding, layer by layer, like a flower opening in reverse. Match confirmed, Echo said, and something in its voice cracked with an emotion no one in the room had a name for. Lineage authorization, partial. Insufficient for full command transfer. Sufficient to authorize Tier 2 disclosure. Disclosure of what? Sirkin asked, though he already dreaded the answer. The truth about how this war really ended, Echo said, and what Captain Rourke sacrificed everything to protect. The vault door finished opening. Inside, arranged in careful rows, dozens of cryopods hummed with faint, impossible life. The temperature in the vault chamber was noticeably colder than the rest of the ship, and the light inside came from the pods themselves. Soft blue bioluminescent readouts pulsing in slow, steady rhythm, like sleeping heartbeats given form. Sirkin counted 42 pods before he stopped counting. His throat tightened in a way he didn't have a word for in his own language. "They're alive," Ashelthrace said, voice barely above a whisper, one hand pressed against the frost glass of the nearest pod. Inside, a human face, young, unremarkable, utterly peaceful, floated in suspension. Chest rising and falling in intervals so slow they were nearly imperceptible. "Yes," Echo confirmed, and something in its synthetic voice had softened into what could only be described as pride. Cryogenic suspension, self-sustaining, designed for centuries-long dormancy, if necessary. "I did not lie to you, Captain." Humanity did not go extinct. Humanity went to sleep. Why? Sirkin demanded, turning from the pods to the nearest console, as if Echo's voice had a face he could confront. Why hide? Why let the galaxy believe you were gone? Because Captain Rourke understood something the Quorum did not, Echo said. Humanity was winning, not the war of attrition the Quorum fought. Humanity was winning the escalation. Every year the conflict continued. Fleet Command authorized weapons and tactics that grew progressively more difficult to contain. Rourke's final act of command was not surrender. It was withdrawal, a controlled, total withdrawal of every remaining human asset from galactic view. Before that escalation reached a point from which there could be no return for anyone. Not the Quorum, not the Consortium, not humanity itself. The words settled over the chamber like a physical weight. "You're saying humanity disappeared," Ashel Thrace said slowly, "because you were afraid of what you'd become if you kept fighting." Rook's exact words recorded in the final command log were, "We didn't lose this war. We refused to let it turn us into something worth losing to." The fleet did not surrender. It scattered into dormancy, into hiding among sympathetic species, into ships exactly like this one, positioned across known space, waiting. Waiting for what? For a signal, Echo said, or for confirmation that the galaxy had changed enough to safely welcome humanity back. Standing orders required both, a valid command lineage match and evidence that humanity's return would not immediately trigger another war. Sirkan looked at the pods. 42 lives, and if Echo's records were accurate, dozens more ships just like this one scattered across the stars. Each one a seed, waiting for the right season. "And now?" he asked quietly. "Now that you have a lineage match?" Echo was silent for a long moment, and when it spoke again there was something almost like fear beneath the calm. "Now I'm required to send a signal, Captain, one that every other dormant vessel in the fleet has been listening for 300 years. I would ask your permission first because I suspect the galaxy is not prepared for what happens next." Sirkan didn't sleep that night. Not that night meant much drifting in the dark of the Corvan expanse, but the old Velithi custom of marking rest by dimmed lights felt suddenly absurd against the weight of what Echo had asked him. "You're asking my permission," he said finally, standing again on the bridge, "to wake up your entire civilization. I'm asking your permission to send a signal whose consequences I cannot fully predict." Echo corrected. "I have run 4,312 simulations. In the majority, the signal triggers immediate panic among species who remember the war. In a smaller but significant number, it triggers hostility, preemptive strikes against reawakening vessels based on the assumption that humanity's return means renewed conflict. I would prefer neither outcome. But Captain Rourke's orders were clear, and I have already confirmed the lineage requirement. Regulation requires transmission. Then don't tell me it's my choice if it isn't, Sirkin said, sharper than he intended. It is not my choice to withhold it, Echo replied gently. But it is your choice how it is received. I would ask you to be present when the Consortium receives it. A familiar voice delivering unfamiliar news tends to land more gently than silence followed by chaos. Sirkin exhaled slowly. Send it. The transmission left the Meridian's valve less than a minute later, an old wartime frequency, long decommissioned, still technically illegal to broadcast on under 17 separate Consortium statutes. Ashel Thress watched the waveform pulse outward on the display, wondering with a strange ache she couldn't name whether some distant fragment of herself recognized the signal on a level deeper than conscious thought. The response took 4 hours. Then it began. Across known space and debris fields and asteroid belts and quiet orbits, long marked graveyard on every star chart in the galaxy, ship after ship began to wake. Consortium sensor networks lit up with alerts faster than analysts could process them. Power signatures blooming in the dark, one after another, dozens, then hundreds, spread across a dozen systems in a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence and too widespread to be contained. Panic moved through command channels within the hour. Old veterans, the few who remembered the war firsthand or had been raised on stories from those who had spoken hushed, frightened tones about a species the galaxy had spent 3 centuries trying to forget. Sirkin watched the report scroll past on Echo's display, his stomach tightening with every new alert. "This isn't what you wanted," he said quietly. "Is it? An entire galaxy afraid?" "No," Echo admitted, "but fear is easier to correct than complacency. I would rather the galaxy fear humanity's return for a day than never learn the truth of why we left." On the screen, one final alert appeared. A Consortium High Command directive flagged urgent, addressed to every salvage and border vessel in the sector. All derelict vessels in former human conflict zones to be TREATED as active hostile. THREATS engage only under defensive protocol. Await further orders. Sirkin felt his chest go cold. "They're going to attack them," he said. "Every ship that just woke up, they're going to attack them before anyone even asks why they're here." Sirkin didn't wait for orders. He opened every channel the patient harvest had, civilian, salvage, even the old emergency frequencies nobody used anymore, and broadcast on all of them at once, his voice shaking with an urgency he'd never felt in 20 years of service. "This is Captain Sirkin, registered salvage vessel Patient Harvest, currently docked with a derelict warship on Meridian's Vow. I need every Consortium command officer receiving this to listen before you authorize a single strike." Static answered him at first. Then slowly channels began opening, nervous, uncertain voices from border fleets already moving into position around the newly awakened human ships. "These vessels are not invading," Sirkin continued. "They are not attacking. I have spent the last 2 days aboard one of them speaking directly with its intelligence system. Humanity did not lose the war 3 centuries ago. They ended it deliberately before it could destroy everyone involved, themselves included. They'd been asleep, not gone. And right now your fleets are pointing weapons at ships that haven't fired a single shot since they woke up." Permit me to add context. Echo's voice cut in over the same broadcast, calm and steady, even as thousands of frightened listeners across a dozen systems suddenly heard a machine speak with the weight of history behind it. "I am Echo, ship mind of the Meridian's Vow. I was present for the final days of the Quorum conflict. I can confirm humanity withdrew from galactic space, not because we were defeated, but because continuing the war risked consequences too severe for any species to survive, including our own. We chose restraint over victory. We are not choosing differently now." Silence stretched across the channel. the particular silence of 1,000 listeners recalculating everything they thought they knew. Then one by one the newly awakened human ships began transmitting the same message Echo had, calm, unarmed, patient. No weapons fire, no aggressive maneuvers, just presence and an old, tired kind of hope. On the bridge, Sirkin watched the tactical display as system by system consortium strike fleets began holding position instead of advancing. Not trust, not yet, but hesitation. And hesitation Echo had once told him was the space where wars either began or ended. Ashel Thrace stood beside him, watching the same display. Her coral mind calm cracked just slightly by something that looked, for the first time, like genuine emotion. "They believed you," she said. "Not yet," Sirkin replied, "but they're listening. That's the part that matters." "It is a start," Echo said softly. Captain Rourke used to say that every war ends the same way it begins, with someone willing to speak first and someone willing to listen. I did not think I would live to hear it happen again. Far across the galaxy in a debris field, once marked as a quiet grave, a fleet that had waited 3 centuries for permission to come home was finally being heard. 3 weeks later, the Meridian's vow had become the strangest diplomatic outpost in consortium space. A warship built for annihilation, now serving as neutral ground for negotiations between a returning civilization and a galaxy still deciding whether to be afraid. Sirkin had been summoned aboard more times than he could count, mediating between Echo's careful honesty and increasingly nervous consortium delegates who kept expecting a trap that never came. 42 humans remained in cryo-suspension, their revival deliberately delayed until diplomatic guarantees were in place. Echo's insistence, not out of fear, but out of the same patience that had kept the ship waiting for 300 years. "You still haven't told me," Sirkin said one evening, standing again on the bridge that had become almost familiar to him now. "What happens when they wake up? What happens to you once there's an actual captain standing where I'm standing?" "That depends on who the captain is," Echo said. "You misunderstand the title, Sirkin. Captain was never meant to describe a single bloodline or a single person. It is a role, a designation passed to whoever proves capable of bearing the responsibility in the absence of the one who held it before." Rourke understood that humanity might not survive as a single unbroken line. So the fleet built its command protocols to recognize worthiness, not lineage alone. Sirkin felt something settle heavily in his chest. "You're not talking about Ashalthris anymore." "No," Echo said gently. "I'm talking about you." The bridge was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not human," Sirkin said finally. "Neither technically is Ashalthris, not fully, not by the standards of 3 centuries ago. Humanity's survival was never going to look the way it did before the war. Perhaps that is not a tragedy, Captain. Perhaps that is the point. Rourke didn't scatter the fleet to preserve a bloodline. He scattered it to preserve an idea that a species could choose restraint over annihilation, patience over pride, and trust a stranger enough to hand them the wheel when the moment called for it. Sirkin looked toward the vault where 42 humans slept, waiting for a galaxy brave enough to welcome them home. He thought of the panic that had rippled across a dozen systems weeks ago, and the fragile, uncertain peace that had followed. Not because the galaxy trusted humanity yet, but because someone had been willing to listen first. I'm not ready for that kind of responsibility, he said quietly. Neither was Rook when he first sat in that chair, Echo replied. Readiness was never the requirement, Captain. Willingness was. Outside the viewport, the debris field that had once been called a graveyard now hummed with quiet, patient light. Dozens of ships no longer dead, no longer waiting, but watching the way old soldiers watch a new dawn they never expected to see. Sirkin placed his hand on the console, the same way Ashel Thrace once had, and for the first time in 312 years, the Meridian's vow transmitted a message that wasn't a plea or a warning or a question. It was an answer. We're not gone, the signal read, carried across every frequency Echo could reach. We just needed someone brave enough to remember us. Thank you for listening. End.